Hi guys, welcome back to Rain Reads. Today we'll be continuing part 2 of, so the second part of part 2, and, so it's continuing from the middle of the chapter, and we'll see how far we get in the chapter. Check out the previous videos if you haven't seen them already, to see where we are. Let's begin. No one had spoken a word to her or to each other, but the silence was so easy she had thought nothing of its remaining unbroken, despite the slowly increasing numbers of these handsome, clear-eyed people. But now, a group of musicians had collected at one edge of the clearing and begun to play a high, thin tune on flutes and pipes and strings, a tune that seemed somehow woven of the silence that had preceded it. The tune wandered over a wide and many-colored countryside as the long-eyed bard, who must first have played it, wandered. Linnadel could almost see him, in his gray tunic and high, soft leather boots, wound round and crossed with long leather laces. Even more clearly, she could see the country he traveled. It was a broad, rolling, welcoming country, and every dip of meadow, every small, grassy hollow held small blue flowers that nodded and tossed their heads from the tops of their long, slender stems. As she listened, what the music showed her lost her for a moment from the ring of trees and the people she stood among, and so he was only a few steps away from her when she shook herself free of the green-eyed bard and saw him. "Welcome," he said, and smiled. It was a smile he had never offered to anyone before, a smile he had saved only for her, knowing that someday he would find her, and he held out his hand. Linnadel understood that smile at once, and put her hand in his, and the music changed so that the trees became pillars of sea-colored nephrite, white jade, and cloudy jasper, and the grass and flowers were a shining floor of pale agate and marble and chalcedony. And they were dancing, and all the other people turned each to each other, and all were dancing with them. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and if her feet had not known what they were doing themselves, she must have tripped and stumbled. He was half a head taller than she, so that she had to tip her head back to look at him, and the strong golden line of his chin almost prevented her from raising her eyes any farther. His hair was black, so black that any light that fell upon it hid itself at once within the fine, heavy waves and was never seen again. It was just long enough to touch the nape of his neck, to tumble over the tops of his ears, to brush his forehead, a tall, broad forehead above eyes so blue that nothing else ever again could claim that color's kinship. And those blue eyes were staring down into the upturned face of the most beautiful creature they had ever seen, and their owner was thinking that if his feet were not capable of looking after themselves, surely he would have tripped and stumbled. Linnadel had no idea how long they continued thus, with the glimmering floor beneath them and the glowing pillars around them weaving rainbows in each other's hair. Her ears heard nothing but the elegant warp and tender weft of the music, but still they spoke to each other about everything that mattered. When the music stopped at last, their understanding was complete. The sudden silence was as gentle and sympathetic as the music had been. Linnadel noticed that once again she was standing in a circle of tall trees, and her feet pressed grass and small spangled flowers. It was not like waking from a dream as she stopped and turned and looked around her, but as if she stepped from one dream to the next, and he was still with her, standing beside her, holding her hand. They faced an arch in the hedge that, now she looked at it, was taller and broader than the others, and outlined in large flowers with long drooping petals of a subtle violet. Their stems were almost turquoise. Lynadel was sure the arches had all been the same size when she first looked at them, just as she was certain that the surrounding trees had formed a ring, whereas now it was obviously an oval with the violet arch at one narrow edge. Two people stepped through that arch, a man and a woman. The man looked very much like him Lynadel had just danced with, although his face was graver and the straightness of his shoulders suggested the strength to carry burdens rather than the careless strength of youth. Lynadel was also sure that his eyes were less blue than her partner's. They could not possibly be as blue. The woman was tall and slender. Her face was so beautiful that it almost hurt to look at her. It was not the beauty that gave pain, but the serenity that rested within it, like a raindrop in a flower. Her hair was dark, her eyes the color of wood smoke, and Lynadel loved her at once. A long train of people followed these two, who paused, it seemed, just inside the threshold of the flowered hedge. But however many people came in and spilled to each side in vivid silken and jeweled waves, the grassy clearing was still uncrowded. At last, all were inside, and for a moment all was motionless. And then the beautiful dark woman swept forward, and the falling shadows of the brocade she wore were as rich and lovely as any cloth Lynadel had ever seen. She caught Lynadel's free hand in both hers and smiled, and she said, "Welcome. We are so happy to have you here." Then the man who stood at Lynadel's side and held her hand raised it and kissed it and said, "I am named Donathor, and these are my father and mother, the king of this land and the queen." The king smiled almost as sweetly as his son, and he too kissed her hand and said, "Welcome." "Donathor is our eldest son," said the Dark Queen, "and so he will be king after his father, when we leave you to cross the mountains and grow flowers in a quiet garden. You will be queen, and we will come back at least once for the christening of your first child, and bring you arms full of flowers, flowers that only our mountain, air, and water can produce. You will meet Donathor's brothers soon, but we have no daughters, much to our sorrow, and so our welcome to you is even greater than it would be to our eldest son's chosen wife." She caught her breath and opened her big eyes wide, and for a moment she looked as young as Lynadel. Yet this woman's beauty had no age, and it was hard to imagine her being able to count her life in years. But her eyes were as soft as a child's as she said, "I am so pleased to have a girl to talk to again." And her smile was a girl's, and Lynadel smiled back and opened her mouth and heard herself saying something at last, and that something was just, "Thank you very much." But as she spoke, she turned back to Donathor, who stood looking down at her as if he had never looked away since he had first taken her hand to dance with her, and perhaps he had not. Two more people approached, young girls, perhaps Lynadel's age. It was hard to assign anybody an age, Lynadel thought, looking around her again. The king looked older than Donathor, yes, she could see that, but it seemed more a state of mind than anything she could see. The king's skin was as golden as his son's, and his black hair had no gray in it. So these young girls, if they were young girls, approached, and they were carrying a golden veil between them, a veil so light that it was hard to see until they were quite near. They threw it over Lynadel, and it settled around her like a fine mesh of fire, and as a delicate gold veining on her white skin. When she shook her head to toss her hair back, it ran over her shoulders like water, and Donathor had to squeeze his free hand close to his side to keep it from burying itself in those dark gold-flecked waves. "Hail," said the two girls, their eyes shining like the golden veil. "Hail to Donathor and his bride, the next king and queen. Hail Donathor and hail Lynadel." And the rest of the people in that glen took it up, and the shout swung through them like music, and they tossed it over their heads like a ball. 2 more girls appeared, carrying long golden ribbons, and handed the 2 ends to the girls who had carried the veil, who now stood on either side of the little royal group of 4. And then the ribbon was unwound, and the happy crowd stepped forward, and many white hands reached out to hold it. And soon a gold-edged path lay before them, stretching straight through the arch where the king and queen had entered, and on, till Lynadel could only see the people as blurs of color, with 2 bits of thin gold unwinding swiftly before them, a strip of green between the gold and greenness behind them. The ribbon stretched so far that she could no longer recognize it as golden. It was a sparkle of light and a boundary, the end of which she could not see. "Hail!" The cry still went near them, and then it was taken up by more and more people who stepped forward to seize the swift, narrow gold. "Hail to the next king and queen!" Then a silence swept back to them again from where the gold ribbons must finally have halted, and it was a silence of waiting. The faces turned back toward the royal 4, smiling and joyous faces, waiting for Donathor and Lynadel to take the first step, so that the cry could be taken up again and thrown before them to where the end of the golden ribbons awaited them. They waited, smiling and expectant, and the king and queen turned and bowed to their son and their new daughter and stepped back for the young pair to precede them. And we'll stop here for today, to keep it short. If you have any questions about anything in this part of the story so far, any words you don't understand, any phrases or anything, please let me know in the comment section or wherever you choose to let me know. Thank you so much for listening. Please let me know if you like this story or not, because I'm not sure. There are a lot of words and phrases that are not common, and there's a lot of missing punctuation, I think. So sometimes I feel like I read parts of it a little bit wrong, so I have to go back and reread it. But let me know if you like this story so far. If not, I can maybe find something else to read. But thank you so much for listening. Take care. Bye.